The town of Ravenbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's name, a peaceful community tucked away in the countryside. But on one stormy night in 1998, the town's silence was shattered by a discovery that would haunt its people for decades. Dr. Henry Wallace, a respected physician who had served the community for years, was found lifeless inside his study. His death was not just shocking, it was surrounded by details so unusual that even the most seasoned investigators were left baffled. The room where his body lay told a disturbing story. The heavy oak door had been locked from the inside, with no signs of forced entry on the windows or locks. This meant whoever had entered must have been let in by Wallace himself. Scattered papers covered the floor, as if there had been a desperate search for something, yet nothing appeared to be missing. The grandfather clock that had stood proudly in the corner was smashed into pieces, its hands frozen at exactly 11:47 p.m. On the surface of the doctor's wooden desk, investigators found a strange symbol carved deep into the grain, an unfamiliar mark that looked deliberate, almost ritualistic. What unsettled the town even more was the absence of any clear motive. Wallace was wealthy, but no valuables had been stolen. He had no known enemies, and his reputation was spotless. To many, he was a man of science and compassion, someone who spent his days healing rather than harming. Yet, the brutality of the scene suggested otherwise. Rumors spread quickly, from whispers of secret experiments to theories of cult involvement. While the official report labeled it a suspicious death, the people of Ravenbrook knew it was far more than that. Something sinister had entered their quiet town, and it had left its mark. Investigators soon realized that Dr. Wallace's life was far more complicated than it first appeared. At first glance, he seemed like a dedicated doctor, respected by patients and admired by colleagues. But when detectives began sifting through his private files, they uncovered documents that painted a disturbing picture. Hidden in the back of a locked cabinet was a ledger filled with names and coded entries. The dates stretched back several years, and the names belonged to individuals who had mysteriously disappeared. Most of them were young, vulnerable, and without close family ties, people whose absence would not immediately spark alarm. The deeper they looked, the more troubling the discoveries became. Records from the clinic Wallace operated showed inconsistencies. Patients admitted for minor treatments were never discharged, their files abruptly ending with no explanation. The local police had never investigated these disappearances closely, dismissing them as cases of people who had simply run away or moved on. Now, with Wallace's death, those missing names began to look like pieces of a much larger puzzle. Adding to the suspicion was Wallace's financial activity. His bank accounts revealed large transfers of money to offshore locations, far beyond what a local physician should have earned. The payments matched the dates and names in his secret ledger, suggesting that each disappearance was linked to a financial transaction. Investigators wondered if Wallace was involved in something much darker than medicine, something that stretched beyond the borders of Ravenbrook. The revelations shocked the community. How could the trusted doctor they had all known be connected to such sinister activity? The once clear image of a kind physician began to fade, replaced by the shadow of a man whose secrets ran deep. The mystery of his death no longer seemed isolated. It was becoming the gateway to uncovering a far-reaching conspiracy. Months passed before investigators received a lead that would change the direction of the case entirely. An anonymous letter arrived at the police station, its words written in hurried strokes. It pointed them toward an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Ravenbrook, a place long forgotten by the townspeople. When authorities entered the building, they were met with a sight so grim that even the most hardened officers struggled to keep their composure. Rusted surgical tables stood in the center of the room, surrounded by discarded medical tools. Stains marked the floors and walls, and the air carried the heavy scent of decay. Piles of old patient files and boxes filled with medical records were scattered across the floor, confirming that this was no ordinary warehouse. It had been used for experiments and procedures that had no place in legitimate medicine. Forensic teams identified some of the names in the files as the very people listed in Wallace's secret ledger. Each document hinted at procedures performed without consent, suggesting that the missing individuals had become unwilling subjects in a larger operation. The most horrifying discovery, however, was evidence that linked Wallace not just as a participant, but as someone who had begun working against the organization. Notes scribbled in the margins of the files revealed his intentions, plans to expose the people behind the network and dismantle the system from within. This revelation changed everything. Wallace's death was no longer seen as the crime of a greedy doctor or the act of a deranged individual. It was now clear he had been silenced. The powerful ring that thrived on secrecy had eliminated him before he could reveal their names. The murder in Ravenbrook was just one piece of a conspiracy that reached far beyond the borders of a small town, stretching across countries and hidden behind positions of power. Margaret Cole, a nurse who had worked closely with Dr. Wallace, quickly became the most important figure in the investigation. She was quiet, dedicated, and known for her loyalty to her patients, but her proximity to Wallace placed her in a dangerous position. Investigators believed she knew more than she had admitted. Her name appeared in Wallace's ledger, not as a victim, but as a witness to several unexplained procedures. At first, she cooperated, sharing vague details about patients who had never come back and strange instructions she had been forced to follow. But just days before she was scheduled to testify in court, Margaret vanished. Her car was discovered near a riverbank outside Ravenbrook, the keys still in the ignition, but there was no sign of her. It looked like she had disappeared in the middle of a journey, leaving everything behind. Search teams scoured the area for days, dragging the river and combing through the woods, but they found nothing. What made her disappearance even more chilling was what investigators uncovered in her apartment. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard was a leather-bound journal filled with her handwritten notes. In her entries, Margaret described living in constant fear. She wrote of being followed by black cars late at night, of receiving anonymous phone calls when no one spoke, and of strangers lingering outside her building. She detailed threats that warned her to stay silent, with one entry reading, "They are watching me. They are everywhere." The final pages ended abruptly, as if she had been interrupted mid-sentence. The journal offered no closure, only more questions. Margaret's disappearance left the case shaken. Without her testimony, the investigation lost its strongest witness. The silence that followed was not just unsettling, it was terrifying, and it hinted that the forces behind Wallace's death was still active, still watching, and still willing to erase anyone who came too close to the truth. Years after the case had gone cold, a shocking twist emerged that reignited global attention. A cache of classified documents was leaked to the public, exposing connections so vast and horrifying that the story of Dr. Wallace and Margaret Cole was only the beginning. The files revealed that the organ trafficking ring was not a small underground group, but a highly organized network with reach across multiple countries. Hospitals, private clinics, and even certain government officials were implicated in covering up disappearances and manipulating medical records to hide their crimes. The conspiracy stretched into places people trusted the most, institutions meant to protect and heal. The documents confirmed what many had long suspected. Dr. Wallace had been preparing to go public with evidence that could have destroyed the entire operation. His notes, discovered in fragments, matched details in the leaked files. He had planned to release names, dates, and locations, but his motive ensured that the truth was buried until it was too late. Margaret's disappearance now seemed less like a mystery, and more like the inevitable silencing of someone who had seen too much. The chilling phrase from her journal, "They are everywhere," took on new meaning as the leak files exposed the scale of the organization. The revelations shook the world, forcing people to confront the uncomfortable truth that corruption had burrowed into the very systems they relied upon. International task forces were formed, arrests were made, and certain facilities were shut down, yet many of the most powerful figures named in the documents remained untouched. For every criminal brought to justice, there seemed to be another shielded by influence and wealth. The legacy of Dr. Wallace's death was not justice, but a haunting reminder of how fragile safety truly is. The shocking truths that finally surfaced proved one thing beyond doubt. Some crimes are so deeply rooted in power that exposing them may cost more than anyone is willing to pay.